Live. I'm going to give people a minute to find it here. Hang on. I'm going to play some bad music.
That is
Is that too loud?
no. That music is.
They only give me a few options. Hang on. I should plug in my headphones. That might help.
I used to work at this place called Jacobson's Department Store in South Florida, and this music really
This
reminds me.
reminds. It's like elevator music.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, they only give
It's
me
better
like
than the
8
hold
options.
music at the hospital.
All right, we're just giving people a sec to find it. I'm going to retweet this. All right, come on in, everybody. Welcome back to the Holler. tnholler.com is where you can find us at the TN Holler on Twitter and Facebook. We're also on Instagram. We're on TikTok when they don't kick us off. And we have hollers hollering all throughout the state. Thanks to your support. We really do appreciate it. A few bucks a month goes a long way. We'd also want to send a shout out to Elisa Parker. If you're buying or selling a home in Tennessee, do it through her. That's a way to support us. She's very supportive of us. And Abby Rubenfeld, who was kicking ass in the Capitol last week, is a lawyer that you should use if you need one. All right, today we're going to talk to two doctors who are very present at the Capitol, constantly sticking up for what's right, and a lawyer who has been speaking out of Knoxville about this abortion ban, one of the strictest in the entire country, that nobody really knew had no exceptions until Chloe Akers started telling everybody, and then suddenly everybody realized it. And so Chloe, if you follow us, you've seen her videos quite a bit. We're always trying to clip her videos and share them and steer people in her direction. So Dr. Bono,
Bono, Bono, like Sonny and
Dr.
Cher.
Bono,
Keep
Dr.
it old
Green,
school.
Chloe Akers, how are you all today? Good to see you all.
Good. Thank you.
Doing good. Thanks.
All right, so I guess let's start with you, Chloe. What can you tell us about the bill as it currently stands in brief? I think at this point people know it's one of the strictest, but like, what does it really say?
So our law isn't one of the strictest. It is the strictest. We're the only state in the country right now currently enforcing a total ban on abortion. And what I mean by that is we have no mechanism to decriminalize the termination of any pregnancy for any reason, even if it's necessary to save the life of the patient, even if it's in cases of rape and incest. We are the only state currently enforcing a total abortion ban, period. And that means Texas has an exception. Alabama, Missouri, Louisiana, Oklahoma, none of those states have a law as strict as ours. We're it. There is currently a bill making its way through the General Assembly right now that seeks to create exceptions when the life of the pregnant patient is at risk. I think it's really important, however, for Tennesseans to understand that while this bill is certainly a step in the right direction and provides a degree of comfort for physicians that they need to stay in this state and keep treating us, it's not an answer to the fundamental problem, right? This law that we have, even if it has an exception, will always put physicians in a position to weigh their liberty interest against treating their patients, right? Whether they're making that decision in the context of an affirmative defense or an exception, they're always going to have to ask themselves, is terminating the pregnancy for this patient worth it in terms of the potential loss of my liberty? And until we restore access to abortion, that component of decision making will always be a part of healthcare. And that's a terrible, destructive thing. We do not ever want to have our physicians in a position to weigh their own liberty interest against the treatment for their patients. It's not fair to the physician, and it's certainly not fair to the patient.
Dr. Bono, let's come to you. So what Chloe's saying there is basically that this law gets in the way of the patient and doctor dynamic. Is that your experience already? Are you hearing that from the medical community? Like, has this had an impact in your world?
So I practice internal medicine. I am not an OBGYN, but I have talked extensively to many OBGYNs that are seeing devastating consequences of this law play out every day in our state. And primarily the harm that's being done is to women. For example, when there's been patients that have had an ectopic pregnancy implanted in the C-section scar. So technically the baby is in the uterus. That raises concern, but the baby can grow out of the uterus and the uterus can basically rupture. So, whenever you have that happen, that woman is at risk of infection and severe bleeding. And, it's women have lost their ability to conceive by losing their uterus. People and women have used countless blood supply to help with preserving their lives. So, when it comes to what we're seeing play out, we've not seen at this moment in time any physicians charged. However, we have certainly seen increases in maternal morbidity, and that's sad. That's sad because we can do better for patients.
Dr. Green, is that also your experience? And I guess I would ask you to weigh in on the bill that we're seeing before the House and Senate now, and how that would actually change the dynamic. Would it actually help?
Yeah, so I agree with Dr. Bono. I'm seeing the same statements from my colleagues on the OB side, that they're having to delay care for their pregnant patients, and that's coming to real harms here in Tennessee. Patients are concerned about getting pregnant here. I know several folks who don't want to risk becoming pregnant in Tennessee. One told me yesterday that she plans to move to Virginia when her and her husband decide it's time to reproduce. We know physicians that have left the state already, and we know that medical students are watching this and they are deciding not to come here to train. So this is going to have a horrible ripple effect downstream of decreasing how many doctors we have to provide healthcare in Tennessee in the long run to everyone. Because it's not just OBs that are going to leave the state. Physicians like, Dr. Bono and I, who are female physicians who may not want to, risk expanding their families here in the state, knowing they can't receive healthcare themselves. So I'm an emergency physician. Ever since the Human Life Protection Act went into effect, I have been fearful that the next patient that comes into my emergency department that is pregnant and has abdominal pain and bleeding, that could be the case, that the DA could decide to prosecute me for treating. So I've been put in a tight spot where I have to worry about violating the federal law, EMTALA law, which requires me to stabilize and treat any patient that shows up in my emergency department, versus the Tennessee state law, which says that I perform that abortion, that necessary healthcare to stabilize and treat a patient, I'm at risk of losing my liberty and my medical license and ability to provide for my family. So that's where we are currently. Now, the bill that's working its way through the General Assembly right now, House Bill 883 and its Senate component 745, would be the smallest of baby steps in the right direction, because it would allow for exceptions for life-saving stabilization of pregnant patients with emergent medical conditions. So things like ectopic pregnancies, spontaneous abortions, which is our medical term for miscarriages, when someone breaks their water prior to viability, and then cases of fatal fetal anomalies. So potential parents who are given devastating news later on in their pregnancy, they're told, the fetus that you're growing inside you will not survive outside the womb. Currently, Tennessee state law forces that person to carry that life inside them, knowing that it will not survive and might suffer at birth. This bill that's working its way through would fix that at least.
Right. And as Representative John Ray Clemens and others who are supporting this bill have said, it's a bare minimum step. And I think Chloe just saying it's not a fix, but it seems to be at least a step in the right direction. So it does have some support on both sides of the aisle, or so we thought. And I'm going to go ahead and play this clip for everybody that has now sort of been passed around. This was Will Brewer of Tennessee Right to Life testifying before the committee that was hearing this bill. And he basically said, if you vote for this, we're coming after you, to Republicans. And Speaker Sexton didn't take kindly to that.
So no, I would not consider this a pro-life law. And in discussions with our PAC, they have informed me that they would score this negatively for those members that wish to vote for it.
It's beneath the dignity of this committee, and it's an offense to my colleagues in here to have a witness come before this committee and assert political campaign threats during testimony. That's completely disrespectful of this committee.
I love that John Ray got gavelled down for that. And then Speaker Sexton came and said exactly the same thing.
On the bill.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
So we've got one more member that would like to speak, and that would be Speaker Sexton.
I'm down here not because I think this vote's going to be close. I'm down here because something happened that I've never experienced in my time down here, which was somebody on a committee testifying tried to intimidate our members by telling them they were going to score them a vote. You can have those conversations in your room. You can have those conversations in email, but to do it in the committee, to try to intimidate this committee to go a certain direction is uncalled for. So I'm here to support this bill, to show you all the support on this committee, whoever votes for it, that I stand with you and not having the intimidation come to this committee.
Okay, so the bill then was voted on and almost unanimously passed. The only no vote was Dr. Brian Terry out of Murfreesboro. So Murfreesboro folks should know that name. And Chloe, I guess I would ask you, what were you thinking as you watched that happen? And also, what can you tell us about our friend Will Brewer there?
Well, so what was I thinking when I watched that happen? I was pretty blown away. You know, I'm a trial lawyer. I'm a litigator, and there's certainly been times when I've been trying cases in front of a jury that I sort of forget where I am for a moment, and I lose my train of thought, and I may say something that, you know, is off topic. I sort of think Mr. Brewer forgot where he was for a moment in time. I think that his organization, which is absolutely an extremist organization, these are radical policies that these folks are promoting. This is the farthest extreme. This is not representative of Tennessee, by the way, but I think that his radical extremist organization for years behind the scenes has been doing exactly what we saw him do in committee. I mean, you know, Speaker Sexton sort of referenced it when he said, you know, you can do this in emails, you can do this in your rooms, but you can't do it in committee. They've been doing it in emails and in private rooms for decades. This is an organization that has leveraged what the lawmakers perceive as political power and votes and endorsements to move an extremist agenda through our state house. And we watched, I think, Mr. Brewer just forget for a moment that he wasn't in one of those rooms and this wasn't on email anymore. And he let Tennesseans see a little bit about what's been going on for decades in this state, which is intimidation, control, power, and using our lawmakers as pawns in a largely sort of religious war that's being waged by Right to Life, which is terrifying. I mean, we have truly seen how this plays out in other areas of the world. I mean, we have as a country intervened in certain areas in the Middle East to specifically keep religious zealots from the helm of government because it is dangerous. You know, our founders recognized that at the beginning here. And I think what we are dealing with here in Tennessee is an extremist organization that, with the guardrails of Roe in place, kind of quietly became ever more radical, a little bit more powerful, and are now behind the wheel of the car. Okay. And they will drive this state off a cliff. They will crumble our economy and destroy our healthcare system because for them, the ends will always justify the means, as it tends to do in any sort of religious war. And so it's terrifying. And that's what we saw. We saw a lobbyist for an extreme organization straight up on camera in public threaten lawmakers with political repercussions if they didn't do what he wanted. And that is a serious problem, particularly when you understand that his organization is radical and extreme and not representative of the majority of Tennesseans, who the Vanderbilt poll recently, indicated what I think most of us on this call already know. The vast majority of Tennesseans support abortion rights up until gestational viability and reasonable regulation thereafter. This is not a war that most of us are interested in fighting. And unfortunately, Tennessee Right to Life is dug in. And so yeah, and Will Brewer is their lead lobbyist. I believe he's been out of law school about 6 or 7 years. He, to my knowledge, works and lives here in Knoxville. I've been a practicing criminal defense lawyer for over 15 years. Admittedly, some in Philly, Milwaukee, Seattle, but I've been here in Knoxville for, I don't know, maybe the last 3 years, and before that, about 3 or 4. I've never seen him in the city county building. I've never seen him try a criminal case. I've never seen him prosecute one or defend one. And I, of course, have defended cases, 24 serious felony cases over the course of my career. I've never seen him in a courtroom here in Knoxville, so or any of the surrounding counties where I practice either. So that's who he is, and that's what we saw. I also want to mention quickly that for anybody who's really interested in some of the effects of our law on OBGYNs and maternal fetal medicine physicians in particular, there's a really amazing piece published today in The Guardian. And it was a diary that Dr. Layla Zahadi Spong kept while she finished up working here in Tennessee as a maternal fetal medicine specialist in Chattanooga before she left and moved to Colorado in January. And in this piece that The Guardian published, you can read Dr. Zahadi Spong's own words about what it was like to deal with patients who had lethal fetal anomalies that couldn't be treated, women that were very sick and dying, and how that experience translated for her as a physician and for her patients. So I want to make sure we put that out there for people, that there is a resource to read directly and hear from an OBGYN who did leave our state.
Okay, great. Well, I'm glad that we know about that. Dr. Bono, we've now seen this come out of Right to Life, basically saying that even though the language appears to be softening a little bit with an amendment, that they're still opposed to HB 883. What do you say to some of these Republican legislators who might think they can somehow satisfy these extremists with softening language and getting into semantics, when really at the end of the day, we know that what they want is what we have now, which is forcing women and young girls to carry to term, no matter what it means to their own bodies, to their own freedoms, and no matter how they became pregnant, even in cases of rape, incests, and other, horrific circumstances.
So what do I say to that level of harm to patients? Well, I think that instead of having special interests in mind, we need to have our patients' interests in mind. Pregnancy is not exactly the safest thing to encounter in your life. I can speak from personal experience. When you're pregnant, you are taking a risk with your life for the sake of the baby that you want desperately. And sometimes things go wrong. And so when things are so extreme in our laws, there's just not enough room to allow for compassion that's necessary whenever we are caring for pregnant patients. So I really am devastated that as we try to find some common ground and find something that's reasonable at the bare minimum with the language that came out of the Population Health Subcommittee on House Bill 883, I'm just I just don't understand how, whenever there are people that are working in good faith to try to meet in the middle, that the special interest groups just continue to rake us to the other side. And it's just, it's heartbreaking, because we can do better for Tennesseans. We can do better for patients. It hurts me to know that some special interest groups will not trust doctors to do the right thing. I mean, doctors, whenever you're caring for a pregnant patient, you're always wanting to care for two individuals at the same time. You want mother and child to have a good outcome, both of them. And so, what hurt me the most whenever I was listening to testimony during the House Population Subcommittee last week was just to have my profession demeaned by someone that doesn't know anything about what we do. We work, we practice. Medicine is not necessarily the most scientific thing. It's got a lot of art to it. And so when I hear someone that doesn't do what I do trying to tell me what's right for my patients, it hurts. And it's just it lacks compassion. I spend years working on my good faith medical judgment. I want to do the right thing for the patient in front of me. And a clinical scenario that I encounter, it always has a different answer because I always have a different patient in front of me. So I just don't quite understand how my good faith medical judgment, if it's good enough for doctors, if it's good enough for my patient, why is it not good enough for the state? Why is it not good enough for our government? And I'm just very hurt that my patients are not being respected.
Right. And I think you're talking about special interest. That kind of speaks to what Chloe was saying about the interests are not aligned here. Tennessee Right to Life's interest is not to find common ground. It's to gin up hate, gin up anger so that people contribute to their cause, contribute to their organization so that they continue to maintain power and grow. And so that's an insatiable appetite that they have that's never going to be satisfied. Dr. Green, just if you could weigh in on that feeling of a lack of trust. I think that's something that we're seeing, not just with doctors, but with teachers, with librarians. There just seems to be a general lack of trust with professionals and experts in our state coming from the Tennessee Republican supermajority that's probably going to chase a lot of people away and hurt us in the long run.
I think you nailed it on the head right there. There is a lack of trust right now, and the trust in doctors and the medical profession as a whole started becoming eroded during COVID when we saw our legislators up there listening to anti-science, anti-vaccine, supposed experts, but really they were extremists on one side versus actual medical experts. We have Dr. Hildreth at Meharry, who is an expert in infectious diseases and vaccines. Did they listen to him over, people just spewing total nonsense on the Hill? No, of course not. And so for the last 3 years, Dr. Bono and I have just, taken hit after hit from the legislators who have decided they know better than we do. We've gone through medical school. We've gone through years of training and residency as well to practice our profession, to treat patients. And, one thing that has become more standard medical practice these days is something called shared decision making. So medicine back in the day, hundreds of years ago, was very paternalistic when physicians would just tell you what they were doing and, you just had to put up with it. Now we want to put the patient first and have them help make the decisions about what happens to their body when it comes to treatments and procedures. And what the Tennessee government has done is taken that shared decision making away from the women of Tennessee who are pregnant. They no longer can decide, if they don't want to further a pregnancy with a fetus that is not viable. The state is saying, no, you can't make that decision. We're making that for you. So what we're seeing up on the State Hill is that the legislators are overriding, years of scientific evidence and medical practice and what our standards should be. And it's very disheartening. I just have to say, I've thought about leaving the state too. My husband and I have discussed it. I'm staying at least for now, but how many hits am I going to take in my profession before I decide to pull up my stakes and go elsewhere where I can practice medicine as I've been trained to do, and in an ethical way that is right?
Well, we're hearing that more and more. And, I keep wondering when businesses and artists and, conferences that come to Tennessee are going to start to be public about not coming here. And, I thought it was going to be this particular bill when, the trigger ban went into effect. Then you think it's going to be the drag show bill, the anti-trans healthcare bill. These guys are not going to stop until there start to be some actual consequences. So Chloe, I guess I would ask, how, we the numbers you talked about in that Vandy poll were right. It's something like 75% want some exceptions in the abortion ban. But the other part of that poll, which I think is really important, is that only 19% knew we didn't have any exceptions. So how do we break through in this state and get people to understand what's actually happening? I know the three of you do your part. We try to with the holler, but it's a Herculean task because most of the people that we're trying to get through to are listening to Fox all day long. They've got right-wing radio on. They don't hear the things that we're saying. So how do we get through to people with a message that we know is actually popular?
I think this is going to take a lot of time and a lot of effort by a lot of different organizations, different people who all have a different stake in this fight, right? I spent 6 months from June all the way to December explaining no exceptions, no exceptions, no exceptions, convincing the New York Times, convincing the Tennessean, convincing my local news, convincing everybody that an exception is not an affirmative defense and we don't have an exception. And it slowly has started to take hold. We had lawmakers over the summer claiming that there were exceptions to this bill. And now we have a bill moving through the General Assembly to actually create the exception that they previously said already existed. Okay. So I think
this bill is almost in response to your efforts to tell us and teach us that we don't have an exception.
Yeah. I mean, and we also were very fortunate to watch what the DOJ did in Idaho and understand that there was one other state that had a law similar to ours. And, it's not just me saying this, it's the entire Department of Justice and, federal district judge. I think it's going to take a lot. I think also, something that these GOP lawmakers are not accounting for is we have a booming economy here in Tennessee. Our legislature has done a fantastic job at promoting policy that creates and enforces a free market economy. You go to Nashville and you can't look one direction without seeing a crane. You see people moving here from traditionally blue states, California, New York. You see people coming to Tennessee. You go down to Chattanooga, you talk to any realtor and they'll tell you people want to be here. That's going to stop. Okay, that's going to halt the minute everyone else realizes that our GOP lawmakers are no longer enforcing traditional conservative values and protecting our way of life. They are substituting their judgment for everything from doctors to librarians to business owners to corporations to manufacturers to who can ship what and where, what products we will allow to sell here. And it will devastate our economy. And I think that needs to be a part of this discussion, that these GOP lawmakers were elected to promote policy that created and fostered economic stability and growth. All of this policy that they're promoting publicly, loudly, is going to have the opposite effect in this state. People will not want to come here and people will want to leave. And by people, I also mean business. And so this is a very serious economic issue that has huge impacts well beyond one particular bill or another. And it's time that these Republicans start behaving like Republicans and value our communities, our way of life, and our economic stability, and stop promoting insane policy around drag brunch. The juice isn't worth the squeeze here. I'd like to keep our state a wonderful economic, bastion of growth, but it will fall off the map if we don't throttle back and get control and have them actually act like Republicans.
Right. And I guess I would just say I'm surprised that hasn't already happened. I feel like we're sort of off the cliff already and have been for some time. Yes, the drag show and trans youth healthcare ban passed the House today, but we've known about them for months. And so, where is everybody? That's kind of how I feel. And I know I'm not alone in that. Doctors, either one, if you want to weigh in on, do you feel, I know you've both mentioned that you've heard from people who are leaving, do you feel the impact of it in your profession already? And, is this the kind of thing where we're going to start to see people not wanting to come practice here more and more?
I can tell you that I know a few people that have not applied for residency positions here in Tennessee as a result of our abortion restrictions. And I think that when as a physician, as a healthcare worker, as we've gone through the last 3 years of really intense work in a very murky political environment, it's really sad to have politics keep entering the exam room, and this is just like a sincere amount of government overreach into the patient physician relationship. So there's just it's a pattern of bad behavior of the General Assembly. I'm from Tennessee originally. I think that growing up here, I had faith in my elected leaders to do the right thing, and I don't know that I have that same faith like I used to, and so the deficit of trust that we face, it's all over the place. And so, yeah, there is some moral hazard here that we're dealing with as professionals. Like it really, you have to start wondering, I want to do the best thing I can for my patient, but the system's not going to let me. And so, you feel a little bit demoralized. We're not exactly burned out or overworked. We're just demoralized by the chronic attacks on healthcare. And so, you got to making the individual more resilient is not the answer at this moment in time. There's a diminishing marginal return on making healthcare workers more resilient. At this moment in time, we need systemic change because we're not going to survive the system.
Dr. Green, just as a sort of getting towards a final note here, what would you say to people that want to push back, that want to fight? I know you're on the Hill all the time. What's the best way for people to plug in to the resistance that we're seeing?
Well, Amy and I can't do it alone. Chloe can't do it alone. We need our own army of folks speaking up. I know everyone can't go down to the State House every week. They have their committee meetings during business hours, and folks are busy. They're working. They've got children to take care of. But what you can do, what everyone can do to help us, is to call and email their legislators. Let them know that you want reproductive rights back in Tennessee. At the bare minimum, we should be passing House Bill 883 so that we have exceptions so we can provide necessary health care to mothers in medical emergencies. So go to capitol.tn.gov. The top right-hand link has a Find My Legislator button. It's very easy to type in your address and find out who your representatives are. So send those calls. If you're nervous about calling, I was nervous about making my first phone calls too. Do it after hours. Then all you have to do is leave a voicemail. Takes a few minutes. It's very easy. Shoot those emails. The problem right now is the extremists on the right, Will Brewer and his RTL folks. They are outnumbering reasonable Tennesseans with their phone calls and emails about 10-1 right now. And so we are in real danger of this bill not even making it out of committees. So we need Tennesseans that understand that necessary health care should continue and be provided by ethical doctors using our good faith judgment. You need to speak up and help us out.
I think that's a really important point that, even though they are in the minority, it's a loud minority and legislators are hearing from them. They're getting emails, they're getting calls. They've worked very hard to make this state the way it is. To their credit, I disagree with them on everything, but they've started from the ground up. They work really hard. There's a lot of energy on their side of things. So, that does need to be matched. And democracy is not a spectator sport, as we've seen time and again. Chloe, what would you say to people about that, about how to push back, on this movement to make women second-class citizens in Tennessee?
I mean, I would absolutely echo what Dr. Green just said. You've got to make those calls and send those emails. That is extremely persuasive to lawmakers. And that's something that everyone can do. And I think it's really critical for folks to understand, you may completely disagree with abortion access, But if you want to maintain your economic security and you want to live in the Tennessee we've come to know and love, which is one where we have business and opportunity and growth and education and a thriving job market, you're going to need to have these laws changed. Period. End of story. This affects everyone, even those who think that they are so far removed. This is an issue of economic security just as much, if not more, of healthcare. And I think we have to start paying attention to the way that our General Assembly is promoting policy that is devastating to our way of life. And I think that it's critical that we all get out there. We were talking before we went live here. I'm working on a number of different ventures to address this issue. And I have talked to political consultants from all over the country who've said to me, what you're doing is really smart. You should do it in Georgia where you can actually make a difference. And I'm not leaving Tennessee. I'm not going to launch any venture in Georgia. I believe in the people of this state. I believe in the 70% of people who are reasonable and rational and moderate and open-minded and faith-based. But I don't believe in extremism. And I think we can do better. We will do better. But we're going to have to show up and speak out. And it's a little uncomfortable and odd at first, take it from me. But once you get the hang of it, you do. And I think we really need to remind our lawmakers that Tennessee Right to Life is an extremist organization that does not represent the moderate voters in this state who simply want strong family values, a thriving economy, good schools, and opportunities for growth. And these policies, including denying access to abortion care, are going to devastate our growth in those really important ways. So I think making those calls, sending those emails, speaking to people in your community, and connecting these dots is really critical.
I think that's a really good opening to your speech as you run against Senator Richard Briggs in the future. Thank you all for doing what you do. I think the evidence that shows us that they know what they're doing isn't popular is that they lied to pass this bill on the House floor and claimed that there were exceptions when there were not. So we posted that clip. We could post it again. But Susan Lynn, who carried this bill, answered Gloria Johnson saying there were exceptions because she knew that to say there are no exceptions was not popular. So she said there were, and there are not. And that's why we now see a bill in the House to fix it that may or may not be stalling. We're not sure yet, but does need your support behind it. So call your reps, tell them this is the bare minimum, push Bill HB 883, I think it is. And then another one after that to restore abortion rights in Tennessee. Thank you all for what you do. If you have any final thoughts, now would be the time to say it. But otherwise, I just want to say I appreciate you all.
Thank you.
Appreciate you. Keep hollering.
Thank you.
We will. All right. Thank you guys. Take care.
All right, thanks.
Bye.